All right, welcome back to Work 4.0. Today I'm sitting with Wagner Donoso. Wagner has worked as a psychotherapist, human capital consultant, executive coach, and has worked for companies like IBM as their global VP of talent and leadership transformation, and Prudential Financial as their VP of organizational effectiveness. He is the author of Leading to Succeed, Essential Skills for the New Workplace, a book I just finished reading this morning. Wagner, good to see you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, two guys who are licensed therapists who then got into workplace upskilling and transformation. Look at us. How did that happen?
I think we are thinking about the future. And I often say this because if you allow yourself to set a direction, not a destination, you allow for the opportunities to come and you take them. At least you have the choice. And I think that's what we did. We made choices.
Will you walk us a little bit into how you got to those choices? How did you go from practicing psychotherapy to then working at IBM?
Well, it's important to me, especially now, the belief that you have in yourself, the belief that you have in what's your purpose, given the context you're in. I'm very responsive to the context. At the time that I chose social work, clinical psychotherapy, and all this, is when the AIDS epidemic was really impacting my community.
And where were you living?
And I was living in New York. When I arrived in New York, there was a huge need for volunteering work. So I started volunteering, creating those connections between how can I do what I love to do and help people and actually build a career on this. And it was beautiful because from social work, you start navigating the difficulties that people have at work.
Sure.
And then an employee assistance program asked me to join them. And that was fascinating to listen day in, day out, 150 companies globally. What are the issues that employees were having, managers were having with their employees, substance misuse, and all the intricacies of living in community. And that gave me the idea that actually I could do more. And then I said, why don't I do training on helping leaders, helping HR to deal with these interpersonal dynamics?
Sure.
Let's call it that way. And I think we still need to do a little more work on that because interpersonal dynamics is the heart of your culture.
Sure. And then for you to get into IBM, I hear that you had to be rather tenacious to get interviewed.
I would say I was creative. I'm from Brazil and coming here with no money, no plans, no social support. You have to be creative. And in Brazil, I learned to be creative. When you don't have resources, innovation comes. And here was the case. I found somebody at IBM, right? I think you know this story, but I found somebody at IBM that was the head of talent and diversity. But I didn't know anything. I called the assistant, said, no, sir, no, sir, no, sir, and I'm not going to give you his name or number, nothing. But I knew his name. So I made that combination of his name with us.ibm.com because I knew the suffix of the email. And 15 combinations, one went through. Nice. So that's how I got it. And I got an interview with HR, and HR said, look, interesting resume, but what do I do with you? You're a psychotherapist, you did this, you did that, but what do I do with you? I said, I don't know what you do with me, but I can be your greatest cultural evangelist because I truly believe in the IBM values. In 3 weeks, I had a job.
And what was that experience like with your first year on the job there, knowing all your training that you had gotten through social work and your experiences then, you know, working through employee assistance and everything you had known about, you know, individual psyches? How did that then start to apply in the workplace? And when did you know you could have a real impact there?
Not at first, because I think coming from Brazil, I always had the self-limiting belief that my education in Brazil, which was public schools in Brazil, and I finished high school at night.
Wow.
You don't hear that in the United States much.
Sure.
And I did college at night because I had to work and all that. So I had this self-limiting belief that I didn't have what it took like the others. My colleagues went to Ivy Leagues and all this. I felt like, do they know that I have no idea what they're talking about? Because organizational psychologists, and you had all that, and there are incredible people. So initially, I didn't reach out for the psychological knowledge I have. What it came up was imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome, I remember clearly when one of the leaders said, I want all of you to present on your favorite change models. I said, what is he talking about? And I asked a friend of mine, I said, what is he talking about change models? I don't have any models for change. I know how people change psychologically speaking, all that. And she helped me tremendously. But that's how it goes, right? I don't have a problem stepping into a new experience, but it's hard for you to feel confident right away. That's why I work with imposter syndrome. I work with a lot of these concepts because we all experience them.
Sure. When's the last time you remember imposter syndrome really coming up for you as far as being a roadblock or resistance to something you were doing in your life?
Actually, that was a big one because I never had a corporate experience. That was
Sure.
my first one. I think more recently is when people identify me as an expert.
Mm.
You know, after I finished, left Prudential, stay on my own and doing my book.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you become an expert. I always thought I had taught leadership because
Sure,
I'm very
sure.
creative that way, but I never thought I as a expert.
Yeah.
And when you go on a stage and people are expecting an expert to do a keynote, you better be prepared. And this is the thing. I write about this on the book because imposter syndrome is a simple reaction to a new experience.
Right.
So I normalize these things. And that's what I think about emotions, right?
Totally.
We know as psychotherapists, you know this very well too. Identify them. It's important to identify. Name them, because otherwise you don't know what you're dealing with anxiety, depression, and you have to name the emotions you're experiencing. And then you have to normalize them.
Right.
I spent like the last 20 years normalizing the experiences I have. They're not so great because they're normal experiences.
Sure, and I love what you're highlighting there around imposter syndrome, because experiencing imposter syndrome isn't a problem.
Exactly.
And I've actually never met anybody who was successful that other people would look at and say, oh, wow, they're an expert, or wow, look how accomplished they are, who didn't consistently struggle with imposter syndrome at different
Exactly.
levels in their life.
Exactly.
And what I came to learn from interacting with more and more of those people is that imposter syndrome is actually a signal that you are
Yes.
stepping into a new layer of growth.
Exactly.
Because ultimately, the only things you experience confidence with are when you have stacked up evidence that you can do something. And so it's not about trying to avoid imposter syndrome. It's about having the awareness that it's coming up, so it doesn't lead to you then playing small or avoiding certain risks. And instead you can hold it with like awareness and curiosity and still try to do your best and create value in whatever the hell you're trying to do.
Very well said. That's exactly it. Which brings us to this idea of organizational life, right? We talk about organizational life. How do you look at a community and start identifying who are the community builders, who are the people who are influencing the community, how leaders naturally emerge? Because that's what I think we are entering, this phase where leadership is not your title. It's not the level of power you have. Leadership is becoming an innate capability that we all share.
One of the things you say, which I love, is leadership is everybody's business.
Yes.
Can you say more about that?
Yes, I came up with that because all organizations that I work with, and when I look around, everybody's in a transformation cycle. But the transformations of the early 2000s was digital transformations because we have to shift processes and a lot
Sure.
of that. And we became globally integrated. Then enterprises start thinking, it's like, how do I change the way we work, the way we build the business and grow again? And then transformations became like the word du jour.
Sure. It's like to be constantly chasing that massive scaling
Constantly.
up, you need to be transforming what you're doing, and you need to manage change.
Yes, but that's what I have a hard time with is the wording, manage change. Change management, you don't manage change, you navigate new contexts. Navigating gives you agency to navigate and choose direction and choose the steps you take.
Right.
Being
right.
managed because I need to accept the change that other impose on me, that's that's counterintuitive. What I truly believe is that change is a continuous process of assessing the realities, multiple realities. That's what's becoming really hard to understand. That we, as organizational leaders, have to allow those realities to happen without judging them,
Right,
because there are multiple realities,
And to your point, our words matter.
and words matter.
And when you approach change thinking that it's your job to manage it, ultimately, like, manage comes from like the Latin word for hand. And so it's about control.
Yes.
And so if you think that your job is to control the variables of what's happening through that change, you are unlikely to be able to see all of the important information about what is happening and what people are experiencing, and you're unlikely to allow for the greatest transformation to actually happen, because actually to navigate through changes requires accepting a lack of control.
Yes.
Requires a way to lead people through it,
Yes.
so that you can navigate and move towards a direction that
Yes.
you want to be heading as a business or as an organization, but also not trying to control every single way that every single person reacts to that transformation.
But it's great to talk to you, Matt, because your psychotherapy background, the psychology behind all this, helps us tremendously, doesn't it?
Oh, totally.
Because it's not about knowing, it's about knowing how to allow people to come to understanding themselves. And the whole thing about listening. We've been trained to listen, but we've been trained to listen to what's behind the words. We are trained to listen to all senses. That's why I tell leaders today, your greatest skill that you can develop is sense making.
Sense making.
Try to understand and capture the signals. People talk about this a lot, but very few know how to sense and make sense of the realities that they are seeing. Because
Especially today.
exactly. But looking at the signals, what are the signals they are giving you some kind of an intuitive knowledge? Because there's a lot of intuition that we need to talk about here. Because nobody has a playbook for the future.
Sure.
That's where we are today. The best we can do is to listen very carefully to each other, listen to the opportunities that we sense in the markets, and co-create something that's not done in isolation. The moment you do a product in isolation from the user, you're in trouble, because it's not going to work. So you see, it's very complex where we are going through. But this complexity needs to be dealt with the capacity to think about these things. And most people don't have the capacity today.
Would you say that sense making is a responsibility for a leader who's trying to create value in an organization?
That's a good way of positioning this. It is an accountability of the leader to sense make, because people need to understand, how do you synthesize sometimes paradoxical realities? Sometimes there is a lot of dichotomies that you need to transform into a narrative that actually is understandable by people. And leaders have to focus on not being judging of what they see or trying to evaluate, but they also have to be very crisp and clear about what is the significance of what they are seeing in the world and how that matters, how does that impact the internal organizational life of their people. Very few leaders are willing to do that, because there's so much pressure from board of directors, from stakeholders, from customers. So what I see mostly is people reacting to customer needs, reacting to board needs, and reacting to public scrutiny, instead of being more responsive to an ongoing process of sense making.
Well, and there is a tragedy underneath that, which I think is connected to this crisis of employee disengagement that we see in the modern workforce, which is when leaders become too attached and reactive to only what their customers and shareholders are saying they want, and not also upholding their responsibility to hold the vision and to support the organizational and individual needs of the people within their business. The people who lose out the most are the people you're most leading, which is your workers.
Yeah.
Because then they don't have you there sense making, holding the vision, and actually helping them to navigate a way forward that they can actually follow.
It's very hard to follow leaders if they're not clear about where we are going. So clarity creates capacity. I often say this because I believe that's the only way we're going to stretch capacity. People are complaining they cannot upskill themselves. They cannot learn new things because they don't have capacity. But if you think about what they're saying is they spend a lot of time trying to figure it out what the leaders want from them. American Psychological Association did the state of the workplace in the workforce. And in 2024, only 48% of employees knew what's expected of them. Only half of the employees know what's expected of them. So they spend 40% of their time trying to figure it out. And there is rumors, there is gossip, and of course, assumptions. And people remember the times when we spend like hours on end trying to massage the data for engagement surveys, for example. The engagement surveys never come out clearly stated as data. There needs to be a massaging, and that process takes about 3 weeks, 3 months sometimes. And the problem is we can afford to wait. Data should be digested. I have a friend, actually, this is good. A friend of mine who is amazing CTO, he said, I treat data just like milk. After 2 weeks, I don't think it's good for me anymore.
Yeah, because ultimately, data is a representation of what has happened.
Yes.
And so ultimately, it's helpful for giving you visibility about what's occurring within your organization and how like a product is being impacted to then empower and inform decisions.
Yeah.
But ultimately, if it's taking you 3 weeks, 3 months, or a year to actually sense make that data and connect it to your strategy, by that point, you're working with outdated information. So who knows if your decision is good or not?
Exactly. And that leads me to this thinking. You're talking about leaders taking accountability for sense making and making sure that their vision is clear, their purpose is clear, and actually their strategy is clear. But it brings to the point of how do they translate their strategies into something that people can understand and act on? And I think leaders need to allow themselves not to hold power and start assigning the translation to teams. Teams are the new unit of value. That's what I say in the book.
Can you say that one more time?
Teams are the new unit of value in business. Because gone are the days that you had an industry leader coming from the outside to save the world because they had the industry of 20 years experience in the industry. Today, you don't need 20 years of experience. Actually, it's detrimental to have 20 years of experience in one industry. So you see, the paradigms are shifting. It's not about the knowledge. It's about how do you construct meaning. So from strategy to execution, you need to construct meaning. What is that meaning? It's the organizational capability you're trying to build.
Well, so I want to slow that down for a moment, because the idea of teams being the new unit of value, I agree with you, and I'm with you. And I think it's something that is really hard for a lot of C-suites to open up to what that means about the changes you need to make operationally. And so it's helpful to really further unpack why teams are the new unit of value. And I think, so I want to highlight a few things that I heard you say and expand on them. One of them being, if you have been a leader for decades in one spot, that might actually be something that is a disadvantage. And the reason for that is connected to one of the big reasons around why teams are the new unit of value, which is technological advancement is happening so fast, and the ways that our world is transforming happen so fast, and there's so many people in this world, so many things that are happening these days, that in order to build a business or to build a product within a business, you need to be able to make fast quality decisions. And so you need to be able to disperse and share power so that people who are the closest to pressing various levers across a business have the ability to make decisions. So you can close the distance around perceiving data and taking action, because you don't have those weeks, months, years to wait for information to flow through 1,000 people's eyes to then
Yes.
get to a CEO to then make a decision. You need to figure out what systems can you build so that ultimately you can disperse responsibility so you can make quality decisions faster.
I love what you're saying because basically you're saying leading in the new world of work is becoming easier because you should not be carrying the weight of the world, because before access to data was just for the C-suite. Access to decision making was only to the C-suite. Now if you think about it, teams are much more creative, innovative. They have the power to make small decisions as they go with the client and co-create with the clients. And that is something that I say that I truly believe in. Distributed teams demand distributed power. That's how it works, because the flow of work needs to include a little bit of power to make decisions,
Totally.
because we are changing the way work's done. Leaders now know that access to data is the secret sauce of a great organization. Employees have access to their skills. They have access to the skills that the company needs. They have access to the data that they need to make decisions. Managers have access to that data. That's how HR, for example, is a function in flux, because HR has to leap into this new reality that their processes, programs, and policies are only there to support the architecture. But the architecture itself is done by the employees, managers, and leaders, because it's a co-creation of a culture, right?
Totally. How do we build systems that support distributed power across teams?
I don't think it's that difficult, because if you believe in capabilities, let's identify a capability. For example, a frictionless customer experience. I
Sure.
always go with that because every company has
popular one.
customers. It's a popular one. But most back office operations are siloed because they have to deal with the business, with the clients, customer marketing, all
Right.
the
a friction-full
layers.
experience on that end
A
of the
friction
spectrum.
full.
Right.
But when you start thinking, hey, our best bet for growth is to create a differentiated experience for our customers that our competitors don't have. What does that mean? The people who are in front of them have to be elevated. The same for managers. We've done this at IBM and worked, and I have a study that actually proves that even the teams that went through the manager experience had 13% more likelihood to attain their business targets. We cannot forget to close the loop with the business.
Sure.
If you are helping your managers or organizations to identify capabilities, build innovation, and all this, we need to measure the outcome. And the frictionless customer experience in an omni-channel world requires back office to be integrated. So you see, when you have a capability that translates the strategy into execution, the capability itself is going to dictate the teams that you need to put together.
So
Composable teams.
composable teams. So is it as simple as talent density? Just hire more talented people, and then you have the capabilities, and then you can just trust them?
Not so much. Skills density is important.
Sure.
Talent density, I don't know yet, because there are simpler ways of doing things. If you allow people to really simplify their workflows and not have the threat of losing their jobs, you're going to see that they're going to use the capacity very productively.
Okay, so instead of me as a leader, say I'm a CEO, instead of me thinking that I need to get good at knowing what's happening at every aspect of the business and good at being able to make decisions at every single seat, instead I need to get good at knowing what skills are needed to accomplish the goals we're trying to push forward, and then getting the right people in seats, and then systems that allow them to work well.
That's perfectly said. And I give an example because many of these organizations, I'm not going to name names, but I saw research recently showing that CEOs are very frustrated because they don't believe the adoption of AI is as fast as they would like.
Sure.
And the number one preoccupation is they don't have the skills in-house.
For using AI. Or just in general?
In general, for
In
their
general.
growth
Sure.
strategy. The problem is, if you ask that leader, what skills you're talking about that we don't have, they don't know how
Right.
to
Right.
answer.
Well, more of them.
More of them. So you see, it's not a quantitative approach to management. It's a qualitative approach to how can I give an example, composable teams. If you don't have in-house skills, before you had to rely on outsourcing and all this contractors. Now there is the fractional workforce. There is the independence. There is builders. I have been working with organizations. I have builders that actually you can compose a team outside the organization, combine with your in-house technology team, and you have exponential opportunity to create a product that nobody else has.
But you need to know what you're trying to accomplish and what skills you need.
Then you have to dissect and deconstruct capabilities into platforms, technology, ways of working, organizational design is changing. Skills clusters, because it's not just one skill, it's skills clusters of people, the talent that you bring, and ways of working. If you deconstruct all this, you change the nature of your workflows, you change the nature of silo thinking, you change the nature of individuals versus teams, because now it's all teams working together cross-functionally, and you allow your workforce to be comprised of full-time employees plus all these talent pools that you can pick and choose very quickly. So there is no impediment to bring skills into an organization. It's a made up obstacles. Then I have to say, HR is not there yet. There's a lot of leaders that feel that that's not the way to do it. But if you think in terms of talent acquisition versus talent access, go with talent access. You have access. But for that to happen, you need procurement to be involved, finance, legal, and HR to work as a unison.
Cohesion.
So teams become the unit of value. It's not only HR, it's not only procurement. It's making this frictionless experience for the employee. So you're talking about employees. It's easier to manage an organization where the employee experience is frictionless. They know where to find the information, they have access to the data, and there is no obstacles for them to finish their workflow.
So this actually brings me to another quote from your book I'd love for you to expand on, which is that organizational network analysis, that organizational network analysis is your organizational compass.
Yes.
Can you say more about that?
Organizational network analysis have been there. Social psychologists and organizational psychologists have known this for a long time.
Sure.
And we have done this scientifically. We observe, is an observable thing. Organizational network analysis allows for you to lift yourself above the processes in the hierarchy, just to look at simply who are the focus of influence.
Yeah, how are people communicating? How are they collaborating? And who are the people that are really driving value throughout the organization?
And those are natural leaders. I love that you said value, because if you have to take three things, is take teams, value, and power, distributed power. Because value, if you follow the value, you will compose the right teams. You will get to the finish line in good shape. But O&A, for example, O&A might be the unorthodox way of understanding if you have the skills in-house that you need. Because these nodes that you identify are leaders who might have skills that you don't even know about. Their capabilities are showing through this observation.
Sure.
And then you have to leverage. So it's not about my manager, because my manager doesn't oversee my work sometimes.
And what if you have some bad managers, or
And you have bad managers.
some that just don't see those skills within people, and then you're blind to it.
And solve for one more problem. We have a hard time identifying the capabilities in the top talent and the bright stars when they are introverted, when they come from different cultures. Globally, you know what happens in calls. Certain countries are much quieter than others. So this eliminates that, because actually what you're looking at, what is the energy they're putting out that's creating value for you? That is a positive way of analyzing your organization in terms of who are the people who are cultivating the right leadership skills, who are cultivating the culture behaviors, and they're cultivating value and skills. So it's almost like cultivating a new way of being together. And ONA provides you incredible information about that.
So we've been talking mostly about leaders that are within companies.
Yeah.
And particularly a lot of things we've been talking about are fairly large companies.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about the 5Ds of the future skills.
Thank you.
of
Thank
work.
you for remember that. That's wonderful. I've been studying a lot of this because I tell you this, even at IBM, 10 years ago, literally 10 years ago, I was one of the sponsors of the Millennial Corp. Millennial Corp was a community of millennials who are like the young workforce that's emerging now is the Gen Zs, but it was millennials. And they had continuous contact with the C-suite, with the CEO, was Ginny Rometty at the time. And we used to bring them to decision-making meetings, client initiatives.
Wow.
And they create incredible value for us, incredible value.
Wow.
So it is important for us to start discussing that leadership is everyone's business, and we need to trust that everyone has the capability of developing themselves to a level of value creation that will ultimately benefit everybody.
Amen.
Right? So, yes, it is interesting how organizations are reshaping their communities. But what I see is a very positive trend that individuals entering the workforce are the 5Ds. They're dynamic because Korn Ferry just wrote an article, embrace the short term. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, it's like, no, embrace the long term because we need long-term strategies, everything's so short term. Yes, and true and not true. Those are the multiple realities we are talking about.
Sure. You got to hold both, really.
You have to hold both as realities. And the good news is that they're dynamic. They're not thinking about 3 years, 5 years, 10 years on the 9 boxes to be considered a top talent. No, they want to be known for what they're capable of. They want to stretch themselves to the max of learning. And they're open to co-creation. And they care about co-creation more than we realize. So they're dynamic. They're distributed. No matter how you say the hybrid or non-hybrid, the reality is, even in hybrid organizations and non-hybrid organizations, people are distributed because they're working with the partners. They're working with the other talent pools. They're working with different locations. So this thing of like not distributed, they're all distributed nowadays. Dynamic, distributed, diverse. Demographics are changing, especially in the US, in the West countries. Things are changing in a way that multiculturalism is becoming part of organizational life. They're digital because they're digital natives. And actually the cross-generational workforce needs to be attentive to that. Don't leave anybody behind. You know, reverse mentoring, all the work that you do to level up your organization so everybody feels effective in doing their work is your job as a leader. So, but they are digital. But the most interesting one is discerning.
Why is that the most interesting to you?
Because I truly believe that the new workforce is more discerning because now they have access to more information. They have access to multiple channels of data. They have access to people through all the social networks that they have. They have access to new thinking.
And quite frankly, particularly Gen Z, they're angrier. They're angry, and I would argue rightfully so, by looking at the failures and betrayals of institutions and people in power as they grew up and before they were born. And so you're sort of seeing that anger expressed, and often it's framed as a negative, like they're so entitled, or they ask for so much. And I love how you anchor it as really what we're seeing is discernment. They have strong convictions, which can be harnessed if you understand that about them, that actually it's an advantage depending on how you set up the ways that they work.
It's a total advantage because now you're giving them power to start calibrating their own cognitive capabilities to make decisions that are appropriate. to ask the questions that they need to ask. So this discernment, I think, is a positive leadership force in every organization. It's up to us to leverage it.
Sure. What do you think the future of work is going to look like? Let's say 10, 15 years from now.
Well, I think that there is a huge dichotomy here because the client-facing front office people, they have to work in hospitality, customer service, and all this. They have contact directly with the customers. I think that is gonna be an increase in value. Today, you say, oh, it's a high-value job to be in front of a client or just responding. Not so much in 5 to 10 years because you're going to have the opportunity to upsell. You're going to be as I said, the client experience, the customer experience. If that's a capability you're building, your customer rep becomes a customer advocate. You see the difference? Language matters.
Sure.
And I think we're going to see those roles evolving from customer reps, which is just reacting to the customer, to customer advocates who are actually building that relationship and helping the customer achieve more. So I think that is that too. And so technology is going to help the frontline workers, and I think you're going to elevate that role. That's number one. Number two is that we are going to have less reliance on expertise because expertise is at your fingertips with ChatGPT, Claude, and whatever you want.
So you mean particular experts?
Particular experts or skills, you will find ways of building the skills. You will.
Sure.
The problem that I think we are going to have to deal with is organizations are relying on leaders to make the decisions about everybody else. So executives right now, with their own, they're carrying their own baggage, legacy, behaviors, beliefs, and those I don't see changing in the next 5 years. I really don't, because senior leaders are already stacked up. The famous bench for the CEOs are already there. People know who is going to succeed who. So in the next 5 years, I don't see that. What I see is newcomers, is the new founders, the new companies that really realize that the secret is to have co-creation among their people, and leadership is a distributed, a shared leadership power. I think that you're going to see two economies. The traditional economy trying to stay there with the product orientation, and the newcomers who are trying to incorporate all this, integrate systems. Like you said, I love it that you said systems, because it's about your products become part of a system. So you create systems as a product, and that's going to be new.
Yeah. And there's something really exciting there's something really exciting in that for me, which is you can already sort of see some of the writing on the wall with the capabilities that get unlocked with AI and how many devices and how much data folks have access to. For companies to be started faster with smaller teams and with less capital to be able to start working to create value in particular ways. And what's nice about that is with smaller teams, then you're forced to ask this question of how do we set up a system for us to work well? And like you and I were talking about before, that it's easier to do with smaller numbers.
Yeah.
And so we have so much upgrading we need to do about how we design and structure and maintain systems for how work gets done. And it's really hard to do once you have 10,000, 20,000 employees to transform those systems. But when you're just beginning to build it, it's a lot easier to build it the right way the first time. And so I'm really excited to see as these new businesses come up and people audaciously try to do big things with smaller teams, the sort of ways that they design how they collaborate and what we learn about that and how that forces us to transform everyone's ways of working.
But that you bring full circle, because now what's the unit in this whole system that we need to really pay attention to is the self. Developing your ability to sense the world around you, understanding how you translate what you observe, how do you cultivate new beliefs, because most of our beliefs come from upbringing and communities that we've been impacted, expectations and all this. So I urge people now, especially the newcomers coming into the workplace, try not to assimilate to this workplace too fast, because assimilating means you're denying a lot of your ideas and your beliefs in your creative self to adjust and assimilate. Try to maintain the two realities, like we said, right? There are multiple realities. There's a reality that your company probably is not advancing as fast as technology. We talked about this. People don't have the capability of advancing so quickly because there is stages of evolution in human history. So allow yourself to be calm, because the stress that you're experiencing is more about the constraints in the environment than anything else.
Sure, and there's such great data to back up that point. One of the examples that's coming to mind right now is this study out of the Computational Culture Lab at Stanford, and they looked at cultural fit versus cultural adaptability, meaning when you're hiring, scoring somebody based on situational interviews.
Yeah.
How do you think with their skill sets, their personality, and their characteristics, they will fit with the culture of the team that you're hiring them for, compared with how would you score them based on how adaptable they are to multiple different team cultures? And that ultimately the people that scored higher on cultural adaptability lasted longer in the organization and were more successful within their role. And so really, one, from a hiring standpoint, looking for people who are adaptable. Not necessarily they're going to be fastest at assimilating, but actually have the skill sets for being able to collaborate with multiple different kinds of teams.
Exactly.
And then from an individual standpoint, being able to be adaptable in your life and in order to be resilient and to learn quickly and to make good decisions and utilize your skills, but also to be adaptable as far as how you interact with the different realities of different teams so that you can communicate and be valuable in different settings.
But how do you create that confidence in one to make that discernment between accepting what's expected of me and going with that, as opposed to, hey, I think that's needed, but I also think that this could be done in a different way, because there will be a lot of friction.
Totally.
And I talk about friction too. Talking about friction, tension in business is very productive.
Well, it's if you don't have any tension in a business, you're probably dead as a business.
Exactly. But we need to make that normalize the experience. Leaders need to normalize the experience that the business tensions happen because there are different opinions about how do you get to that purpose, to that shared goal, which is very different from interest positions. If I'm personally positioning myself against the outcome, those are not tensions. Those are friction. Those are frictions that you have to deal with.
So tensions are healthy and natural.
Exactly.
And they are the representations of different perspectives about how to get to our shared goal. And frictions are more so about being expressions of self-interest.
That's it. I think people need to understand that. Because you see, what we say matters, and what we say to ourselves matters too.
Sure.
And that's why I think if we close the loop on the human development. If we focus on helping people develop their best capabilities in terms of being discerning, in terms of being adaptable, in terms of being a little less reactive, just creating humans that are much more capable of dealing with the realities that we are throwing at them, I think organizations would be in incredible shape, because talent acquisition now would be upskilled to understand human behavior. HR partners would be upskilled to understand the unconscious process of human expressions. Leaders would understand that humans have a multitude of experiences. They're all valid, and being a judgmental leader is detrimental to your own goals.
It creates more friction.
Yeah, there's all these things that actually are not that complicated. But companies have to pay attention to the human-centric leadership that it's been missing for a while.
So your book,
Mm.
has been out for almost a year now.
Yes, March.
I'm curious, what do you hope is the impact of that book, and what are you most excited about in your work today and tomorrow?
The impact the book is having on the early career was my goal, and it's fantastic. I've been speaking at Princeton. I spoke at Baruch College. I spoke in college, and resonates with the early career.
And that's who you were hoping would love it most.
Yes,
Amazing.
and actually, I mean, achieving that goal. My mentees happen to be all Gen Zs too, and it's amazing to me because if you get closer to the Gen Z and their counterparts, you can see that the capabilities are exponential there. And you can see that the way they work, the way they become productive is different from the traditional organizational life. And that's when it's really important for us to start working with organizations to see that actually your policies, your processes, your programs actually are being detrimental to developing your culture. Allow yourself to be more adaptable. So organizations have to adapt to the new workforce, and workforce has to adapt to the new world. But it's a continuous dynamic process, continuous.
Amen.
And I think we are getting there. And I'm happy because I talk about shared leadership in the book. And to me, humans have the drive to express. We all have drives, but one of them is to express.
100%.
And leadership is an expression of your beliefs and how do you see the world. So leadership expressions is what I talk in the book on shared leadership, consciousness, understanding how do you understand realities, how do you understand your own beliefs, those who are internalized by others, but you internalize yourself. You need to start finding your true self. That's what we do in psychotherapy. Find your true self and be comfortable knowing who you are, and life gets much better. So consciousness, curiosity, because leading others, you need to be very curious about people, listening much more, and being curious about what's interesting to them, not trying to figure out how to solve their problems. One problem that we have, and we need to discuss this quickly, is mental health professionals have been trained to set boundaries. Transference, counter-transference, natural, but we know how to deal with it.
Sure.
Now we are asking managers to care for the emotional status of their people. They don't have that training and immersion and like enmeshment.
And can create all kinds of vicarious trauma.
Vicarious traumatization, exactly. I love that you have the background because we need to start helping people understand that you are traumatizing your managers if they don't have the training necessary, and they shouldn't have.
Well, and sometimes it's deeper than not even having the training. Is to your point of people not even knowing what's expected of them.
Exactly.
Is so many of the leaders I talk to feel like there's been this sort of ambiguous, growing list of responsibilities that they've been handed without being explicitly told, here's everything you're responsible for. Here's what your job is. And so there's been this increase of things that we need managers to do in order to help their workers be productive. Yet we're not really being clear with them about what their responsibilities are, or then training them and supporting them to be good at those things.
But I think it's a little worse, because if you see how organizational life happens, managers don't even have the agency or the power to manage their teams fully. It comes the end of the year, you have the performance management distribution. Not everybody can be a high performer. Not everybody. So
I think actually that's part of the kind of quiet secret around why that clarity about what's expected of managers isn't clear. And isn't there, because if we got really honest about everything that we're currently expecting managers to do in organizational life, it actually is beyond their capacity. Because what we're actually doing is taking all of the failures of the ways that we have failed to set up systems of collaboration to be effective. We're taking all of those failures and all the things that we didn't accommodate for and how we're designing those systems, and we're secretly shoving them onto the desk of the managers and saying, okay, let me just put that on your to-do list, and they're feeling it. And then it just ultimately erodes that trust and cohesion within the organization, and you're creating more friction, which is then hurting your engagement for everyone on your team.
Totally. But one thing that's emerging in my work with the clients is give people autonomy and ask for accountability.
Yeah.
Give autonomy, ask for accountability, expect accountability.
It can actually be that simple.
It's that
The
simple.
question is, how do you then build a system from that dialogue
Exactly.
at scale?
But I think, you see, what we are talking about is reducing organizational life to the basic community interpersonal dynamics that will lead to co-creation, to teamwork, and things that happen in a more fluid way. I don't know how we are going to do this, but one thing's for sure. Functions have to see themselves as value creators. Right now, corporate functions are very seen as corporate functions, not value producers. Imagine HR, for example. HR should be a capability building business unit because they know the skills, the value of bringing in different talent pools, organizing teams and all that. That should be essentially what HR does.
Yeah.
But it's not happening yet. But I'm very hopeful
Yet.
because cross-functional collaboration is going to be the future. You asked about the future. Cross-functional collaboration, no silo thinking, no hoarding talent. Talent is for the organization, their clients, not for the manager to hold. So there's a lot of things that are evolving, and inevitably we are going to get to a better place.
Wagner, this has been so fun. I feel like I could talk to you for another hour. We'll put links for folks to be able to find your book in the show
Sure.
notes.
Thank you.
Where else would you direct people if they want to learn more about you?
Well, follow me on LinkedIn because LinkedIn is becoming a place where you can have bits of information that can be really helpful to you. So follow me there, and then my website is there. But too many words sometimes gets in the way.
Awesome. Well, we'll link your LinkedIn and your website also in the show notes. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Matt. This has been fun.
Everybody, thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time. Bye.